Welcome to Abstractable. I'm Lachie and with me is Ryan. And this is a podcast for entrepreneurial spirited amongst us, the people that are curious and hungry to learn new things. And in this podcast, we distill the ideas from some of the world's best thinkers in business, startups, psychology, you name it. And today, we're talking about the book, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
In today's episode, we talk about stoic philosophy and how these ideas from thousands of years ago are still super relevant to today. How Hurricane Carter's 2-decade battle for justice was even mentally possible. And we talk about how to domesticate your own emotions. So why is this important? Well, life throws many challenges at us, and to see them in a slightly different way can only be a better thing to help us overcome them. So Ryan Holiday is pretty active on Instagram at Ryan Holiday. He's also pretty active on Twitter at the same. And he also has a website where he writes relatively regular blog posts, ryanholiday.net. As with each episode, don't forget that you can see full video from it on YouTube. And we also have a website now, abstractable.co. So if you do enjoy the episode, it'd be wonderful for you to share it with someone else that may also find it interesting. We hope you enjoy.
And we're back. How are you, mate?
I am well. I am really, really well.
So what book are we doing today? Obstacle
is the Way, Ryan Holiday.
Yeah. Oh, I love this book.
Yeah. This is one that will probably get reread. And I think the same for you.
Yeah, it's on my read every year list. So I just really enjoyed it. The way that it sort of presents, like the way he writes it is really interesting and really cool. Although pretty much say that about every book that we do on here, because it doesn't make it unless it's something we like, right?
I don't think it'd give us a great deal to talk about, mate.
Nah.
And so he's quite a young bloke, this Ryan Holiday, for a man that's talking about, all these obstacles and how to deal with life in that way.
Yeah. So he was born in 16th of June 1987 and I was born in 86. So he's actually younger than I am. And he's authored many books, namely Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator. That was his first book.
And that was his big call to fame. That was what got him on the stage, the world stage, exposing some of the media manipulation that goes on, wasn't it?
Yeah, it seems to be. And also his work with American Apparel, which we'll get to. So he also obviously authored this book, The Obstacle is the Way. 2014, 2016 saw him publish 2 books, The Ego is the Enemy, which I've also read, and The Daily Stoic. And in 2018, he published a book about the Peter Thiel Gawker scandal with Hulk Hogan, which is an interesting documentary on that on Netflix if you want to check that out too. But prior to being an author, he attended the University of California and he studied political science for like a year, but then he dropped out. And he dropped out to become the apprentice or protege of Robert Greene, who wrote many books that people probably know, like The 48 Laws of Power and Mastery.
And those are pretty incredible books, mate. I actually think 48 Laws of Power has been banned in prisons in the United States, or in particular states.
What?
Yeah, I heard a story about that. I don't know where, but they've actually banned this particular book because of just how manipulative people can become when they've got access to it.
That's pretty interesting. It makes me want to read it now. I've read Mastery.
Yes.
And while it was a very dense and interesting book, I found it hard to get through. I found it was more like an encyclopedia.
It's too dense.
Too dense for me, but certainly well researched and had a lot of wisdom in it. So this is where it gets interesting. So when he was quite young, Holiday, he became the director of marketing for American Apparel, which is a really interesting company, which was run by Dov Chaney, I think it is. And it was an absolute baptism of fire for Ryan. He learnt a lot there, he reckons. But the company itself is a bloody interesting story. And season 3 of the podcast Startup, if you listen to that, or if you have listened to that, details the rise and fall of American Apparel, and particularly centering around Dove and what he's like as a person. He's a very eccentric character, but also, I would say, a person of questionable ethics.
Well,
and
so have you listened to this?
I have, and I very much recommend it. I think he's I don't know, but certainly there's question marks around his sexual exploits.
Right.
With some of the models that he would take photographs of that were quite young. And if you look up American Apparel, you can see some of the advertisements that he used to put out. And after you've listened to the podcast, it kind of makes you feel pretty sad about the whole thing, actually. And it was quite interesting that Ryan was the marketing director there, who was potentially putting a lot of this material out into the world. And he really loved Dove, but also saw his dark side, and in the end was a big inspiration for Ego is the Enemy, because the guy basically self-destructed. But yeah, check that out. It's pretty cool.
What's happened to him now? Do you know?
He started a new business now that still sell T-shirts, but I think he's nowhere near where he was before. And that's part of the Startup podcast, but that's a great season. You should check it out. So about that time, Ryan said, against almost every instinct, I listened and I passed. Now, this is about writing Obstacle is the Way. He got an offer early days, just before he joined American Apparel. The intervening years were a blur of events, some good and some pretty bad. I would rise pretty rapidly in business. Around that time, I became the director of marketing at American Apparel. The chaos and the conflict in that company, to say nothing of the temptations and responsibilities, would shape me as a person.
Do you know much about how he actually went about that quick climb? Is much known about that?
Not too much. I guess he's obviously a very smart guy. American Apparel were famous for just hiring people and putting them in really difficult positions, and he probably just jumped at the chance. And this is a pattern I kind of seen in a lot of people who are quite senior in business or something that I've met, that they seem to have been given some sort of opportunity that they've fallen upon and just grabbed it. And when they do, they tend to have a really hard time doing it, struggle for a couple of years, but learn so much from it and almost just kind of redefine what's possible. So they kind of change their scope of what can be done and their confidence levels, and they keep shooting up, even if that particular experience was a bit of a disaster.
Yeah. So they're not afraid to, or they can be afraid to have a go, but they put themselves in basically a sink or swim position. And once you've been in one of those, and it really doesn't matter if you've sunk or swum, to be honest, the more opportunities open up.
That's right. Yeah, I completely agree. But to finish that quote, I learned how to manage people. I learned how to maneuver and accomplish things. Mostly I learned how to survive crisis after crisis after crisis. The stuff Ben Horowitz calls the hard things, which is another great book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I'd like to reread that and do it again on this podcast. But he's also talked extensively about being a workaholic, and that he struggled with this and sort of sought some I guess, treatment for it, and support groups and things like that. And he lives on a ranch outside of Austin, Texas, and his way of kind of dealing with everything is he's a runner. He loves to run. He started a creative agency called Brass Check, and he continues to write quite prolifically. But ostensively, the book's about really stoicism and its kind of, I suppose, main tenets. And it became really popular when it was released in 2014 with professional athletes. It must have been something about the tone of the book and what they go through that it really resonated with them. So New England Patriots read it during their 2014 Super Bowl season. Chris Bosh, who's an NBA star, he named it as his favourite book. And I guess that in itself relaunched it even further. So that's him.
He's become more and more involved in this kind of stoic space, hasn't he? And the Stoics have certainly been a major influence across his life, and they kind of help frame up this book, which is kind of his launch into that space, if you will.
You've listened to his interviews. What do you think of him?
I would say that there's an air of arrogance around him, right? Which is fun, I guess he has done a lot of things, and he's also been immersed, and particularly his time at American Apparel. I suspect that probably gave him that air, because he probably had to do that to survive. Because I have noticed that with age, I've been monitoring him, or watching him for a few years, or at least various videos and speeches he's given, and he's kind of mellowed out a bit, which might be a combination of the just him growing, but also being on the ranch now. He's got a little hobby farm almost, and just spending that time doing some other things. So yours?
Yeah, I felt the same. I think he's a bit arrogant, but I guess it's kind of like I'm reminded about when I watched tennis. Most of the people at the top are pricks. But you kind of have to be to have that sort of tenacity to get that far. I feel like it's just something that's just part of the character trait of doing that. Like even Roger Federer took a long time to calm down. In his early days, he was throwing rackets and swearing at people and stuff. It's not widely known.
We look at the Aussie boys now, our representatives, and cringe and curse at them because of their own.
God for Ash Barty.
Yeah, but was everyone else much different?
Yeah, that's it. So let's crack in. The obstacle is the way.
Yeah, and so this is his one of his biggest mentors, Marcus Aurelius. That is a quote from him, and obviously Marcus Aurelius, for those that don't know, he was the emperor of Rome back in around 100 AD, somewhere around that time, and this was a time where predating the downfall of the empire and the Catholic takeover of the empire, where the emperor not only had to manage the interests of the people and the politicians, but they also had to balance the power of the military, because there was quite often military coups. And so that's not something that we really see as much, or certainly as much today. The military is usually on side with the government doing their particular bidding. So it was a really tough time to be an emperor back then.
A little bit different to the Queen now, right? It's probably more like Australian politics, except you get your head chopped off, literally. The book kind of goes
27 daggers sharp in here.
Yeah, the killing season. So, but the book kind of talks at you. It kind of, it's not a traditional type of, I suppose, the way it's written isn't particularly traditionally. It sort of talks at you. And I found that really effective. Which we'll get into, I suppose, with some of his quotes, but it really kind of puts you on notice and goes, oh, shit, he's talking to me here. I better sit up and have a think about what I'm doing. I suppose the Marcus Aurelius quote is really how he kicks it off. And a lot of the wisdom from this book is taken from back in the ancient times, where he explains that philosophy was more of a practical pursuit. It was actually used to, as a way of, it's like modern self-help. That's what philosophy used to be, instead of like a bunch of professors sitting around talking about existentialism or something completely useless.
Metaphysics.
You might have an objection to that, Ryan. But
no objections from my end, mate. Keep pragmatic.
Yeah.
I think the answer there is no one knows the answer.
Yeah. Oh, very philosophical. Our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impeding our intentions or dispositions, because we can accommodate and adapt. The mind adapts and it converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Pretty cool from someone a few thousand years ago.
He knew his stuff, mate. And what's really interesting is you mentioned that Holiday, he talks in this like he's talking to you, and that's very much how Marcus Aurelius also used to write. So I suspect he's picked up that approach from him, and particularly when you read some of the Stoics stuff, it does talk to you. And I think it's how they refer to themselves in third person, which has a real interesting power to it.
That's pretty cool.
But I was going to say, do we heed all of their advice?
Well, no, surely not. So this is something that I think about when I read things, and Taleb's, there you go, minute 17, first mention. Can't go through an episode without it. He spends a lot of time talking about the ancients.
That's Nassim.
Yeah. And to me, I always find it suspicious. I find that my radar is up about my skepticism about when people try and link, and Ryan does a lot of this, link that they had it all figured out or that weave a narrative through ancient Greece or something like that. And I think that that's for a couple of reasons. And I do it too. So I'm guilty of this, but I probably do it more in a way where it's like, when we were evolving in the savannas of Africa, we would have acted this way because that's how we were back then, But if you take like ancient Rome or something, there's a lot written about it, but just enough for you to kind of be able to weave a narrative through it and pick the bits that you want, I think, because we don't really know everything.
We don't know the full story, mate. We only know the story of those that survived and those that were, either smart enough at the time, because it wasn't all that common to be able to, write history down or write things down or make notes. And
that's true.
And we're also relying on, we've got some pretty good techniques and technologies to deal with, what things were like back then. But these are all interpretations of historians. So you have to be careful about the bias and the distortion field that happens across time. But what I think you find is that there's themes, and it's not the exact nuances and the exact words that necessarily matter from something so long ago. It's more about what is the general idea we're trying to go for here. And it seems that the general ideas that have persisted might be the ones that have the most value in them.
Yeah, I think that's true. The things that survive. But the old is romantic and seductive. You can see that in religion and everything.
You can see that in diets. Paleo. Do you follow the paleo diet, mate?
I struggle to follow any diet, so no. But you see this all the time, right? And it's back we used to hunt the mammoth and tear it open and pick
berries out in the wild. That's fine, but is that up with where the latest science is on what is and is not good for you? And whilst we don't know everything about health and nutrition and everything else, we're starting to form a better and better idea about some core principles.
I would say we know very little about that, in my opinion, but we know more than we ever have, but I'm not sure we've got it figured out.
No, by no stretch of the imagination.
And you know that because when you see two scientists arguing with science and they can't agree, you know it's complicated. But yeah, I think that it's just something that I'm a little bit nervous about, believing that sort of thing just wholeheartedly. It's like any good piece of it's like any seductive thing. It's got some truth in it. There are things from the ancient world that you can take, but just be a little bit careful, I think. It's my kind of instinct to say, oh, hang on, is this really there, And largely, I think, with the Stoicism, and there's a lot written about it, but say ancient Rome, a lot of it comes from the bulk of it comes from people like Plutarch and a few scholars that wrote everything down, So I don't know.
Yeah, those with the
Call
capacity,
me a skeptic.
The capacity and time to write back then. So it's a challenge. But what's quite respectable about Aurelius is he was in there doing it. He was kind of living what he was writing.
It's just so fascinating how modern their problems are. And this is something that Alain de Botton, I think his name is, talks about, the School of Life guy. He's like, we've got all this technology, but have we advanced that far in emotional intelligence? We're probably going backwards. We don't have any. Our community organisations are kind of falling apart, and we're trying to science everything. We're still struggling with the same things. You could say more so.
We've lost touch with our inner selves. The attention revolution, hey?
It's deep. So he talks a lot about one of the core principles is domesticating your emotions too in this book.
What does he mean by that, though?
So what I really liked about this is that, and it was a little light bulb moment for me, is he's kind of like, well, don't deny your emotions, feel them, have the feeling, recognize them and give them the space, but then decide if they're helping you or not. And if they're not, you need to kind of domesticate them or move them to the side and get on with the job. Because repressing of the emotions doesn't work. It just means that that's been my experience, it comes out in other ways. So it's a bit like that meditative technique of just understanding what's coming up and recognizing it.
Yeah, it's great that I think he's used a really clever word there, domestication, because it's not controlling, because there is no controlling of the emotions. And what it implies is it's something through conditioning. It's something through the repetitive nature. It's something through iteration that gets developed over time. So there's, for example, mindfulness, right? The idea of the meditation of mindfulness isn't just the fact of sitting there for, 5, 10, 20 minutes a day. The idea is transitioning that mindfulness into daily happenings. And that only happens through domestication of it. And so that's like that could be a step in the domestication of one's emotions, is that incorporation from the mindfulness practice into the daily life. And then the other bit is the actual encountering situations, encountering particular circumstances that give rise to some of those emotions. Because the only way that you're going to ever see those emotions is by coming face to face with them. And obviously realizing that they're still there in the pen.
Yeah, it's not easy. So the three
and so
chord.
I was going to say, mate, what are some big obstacles that you've come across or that you've faced? Anything that comes to mind that really springs to mind?
Well, I suppose everyone's got a lot of obstacles in their life, I guess. But probably from a work perspective, I think it would be just running a business throws up all sorts of crazy things that happen. It really ups the volatility on your day-to-day, and it ups your, I suppose, sensitivity to that too, because you're actually dealing with your own livelihood. It's not some multinational's money or reputation or that sort of thing. It's you, you know. And so over the last 5 years, it's been a real roller coaster trying to learn how to manage unpredictability and when obstacles put up. And I think the next part of the discussion we're going to have around action has really helped me, as well as the last section about the perception of problems. And that's why this book resonates with me and why I keep reading it, is that I wasn't able to deal with this stuff well in the early days. I really struggled to kind of domesticate my emotions when it came to these sort of issues, and it was causing me a lot of anxiety. So this approach really works for me, and I guess that's, again, why I keep coming back to the book.
That's how it makes it onto the read annual list.
Yeah. What about you?
At the moment, one that really comes to mind is me trying to move out of the corporate life, and I looked at this in a slightly different way. Obviously, as part of going through this, there's all the questions like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You're going backwards, or all of those type of those questionings, or just the funny looks that you might receive.
So do you think those are somewhat perceived, or are they explicit? Are people genuinely saying that to you?
Some are genuinely explicit, and I think some are are probably interpretation on my end, which in itself is not good.
I think it's pretty natural, though.
Yeah, certainly. But what do you think?
I got one more question for you. What do you think that means when they say that, though? Does it?
I think sometimes it's just genuine. Want to make sure that everything's going to be okay.
Sure.
And seeing that things might be going okay, and make sure that it's not a rash decision. And that there's more things going on. But I think the other part is quite often it's a case of, hey, hang on, I didn't want to go and do that. I was too concerned, or I've now made the obstacles around myself too large to try and scale, or trying to deal with, that I don't want to face. So come back here. And so that to me has probably been that's probably been a recent obstacle to deal with. And part of me reframing that up for myself was thinking about how the obstacle itself might continue to grow the longer you live it. And so that was just one.
That's
one
interesting.
Way. That was just one way of approaching it, and trying to make the leap.
That's awesome. It's hard to cut your own path.
We all get to cut the path, don't we?
Yeah. So
how do we take action?
So I suppose this helped me a lot. This kind of idea is that when you're faced with adversity or something that you don't really expect, take action. And that's in a few different ways. He says, first, remember, action is commonplace, but the right action is not. As a discipline, it's not any kind of action that will do, but directed action. So I tend to agree. I've heard a lot of people say that any decision is a good decision. I completely disagree with that. I think that that's born out of people who genuinely struggle with too much indecision and nothing happens. And sometimes you've got to make a call on the information you've got at hand, but less often than you think, I believe.
I am so guilty in that space.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. He says, step by step, action by action, we can dismantle the obstacles in front of us. So he kind of talks at you in this part of the book where he's like, you've got all these problems, but what are you doing about it, you know? And you've got to take the first step forward. You know, we're dissatisfied, but what are we doing about it? Nothing. You know, and we're all guilty of this in different parts of our lives, I reckon. And it's an interesting theme that's in 12 Rules of Life too. And that really stuck with me, where he's like, why do we do things that hurt ourselves? Like not doing the things that we really want, you know? Or for me, eating bad food or not exercising or whatever. And you can say, oh, it's laziness or whatever, but it's probably something a bit more than that. Because I know, you know, let's take the diet, for example. If you've got a child or I've got a dog, I feed that dog the best food every day, you know? So why aren't you doing that to yourself?
Yeah, I go out and spend, you know, $200 on dog food every week, and
yeah,
I spend $40 on myself. Yeah,
it's like, what the hell's that about? And I think it's a similar theme to like inaction or just overwhelmed with the you know, the problems you have or whatever. And he kind of gives a framework for kind of moving through that. But he confronts you. He's like, hey, what are you doing? And it's like, oh shit, I'm reading this, and he's having a go at me, but it's very effective.
A lot of it is because it seems to be the easy way, you know. I find that a lot of these things are because it just seems to be the way that you don't need to think about, or that, you know, doesn't require effort. When in actual fact, I think that's kind of a short-sighted view. Because if you lift the eyes a little bit longer down the track, you know, how is me not at the moment, you know, not going out to exercise today, or me going to eat this burger instead of eating this salad on this particular day. You know, sure, it's an easy decision, and, you know, might make you feel a little bit more at ease. But what happens 2 weeks later, or even a couple of hours later? How do you feel? How do you feel compared to how you would feel if you had gone to go for that run, or you had eaten that salad? And I think that's where the sometimes the distinction needs to be made. Certainly, it's harder said than done.
Oh, big time. And there's like a practical element to it as well. It's not just like a willpower thing. To get over any bad habit or what have you, you need to use the best practical elements of what's out there to kind of learn about how to break habits and that sort of thing. It's not all, you can make it easier for yourself, but then there's a big part of it is like, do you want what's best for yourself? And if you don't, why?
Make small steps, really tiny small steps. It might just be getting the gym clothes on and getting out the door. That's,
and that's where Atomic Habits helped me a lot. And I'm far from a gym junkie yet, but I'm going more regularly and it's helping me break some bad habits that I have. So it's good.
Good on you, mate.
Thank you. A lot of this section is really about problems and how to get through them and around them. How do you approach when you're confronted with something you didn't expect?
How do I approach it, or how do I really approach it?
How do you? Well, both.
So, I think depending on the intensity of the situation, I find myself, particularly when you're in the heat of the work day, heat of the work moment, and something kind of blows up at work, and there's a big issue. Let's say out on the construction site somewhere, and we've struck something, and
I hate that feeling.
Yeah, and everyone rushes in and says, everyone's swearing. There's paperwork going everywhere. There's everyone's calling emergency meetings, etc.
Fingers pointed in different directions.
Fingers getting pointed, voices elevated, energy's up. It's hard not to get caught up in that, and it's hard not to I almost see it as compensating for others' emotions. I find myself kind of get sucked into doing that, and so you kind of lift and elevate. Whereas, and then the challenge is you then pass that on to your team as well, and that sucks them in. Whereas I found really great leaders in the past, particularly in these situations. They just have this kind of metal about them, this real calm, and they slow things down. And so let's say their direct team then doesn't get sucked into the vortex of this intensity. And then what actually ends up happening is it kind of emanates out from there to others beyond. And it's really powerful. So it's and I imagine what these guys do is they just take that, they take the second to go, hang on, understand that everyone's hyped up here, but are we going to make the right decisions by getting hyped up here? And obviously the answer is no. And so I think the important thing is to really lay out what's going on, really lay out what the sub problems are, and then start tackling it in that way and start moving forward.
It's really interesting. Those sort of people have that kind of calmness of mind or centered self to kind of just deal with those things, don't they? Yeah. I think it comes from experience too.
Yeah, enough exposure.
It's like there's a story in this book about the Civil War, and I'll remember this guy's name in a sec, but he's getting a photo shoot, one of the famous generals, and something crashes through the glass ceiling that's above them, and shards of glass are falling down around them. And he just stands in the same place and just waits, because he kind of just must have had that stillness to know that moving around, you're actually not helping yourself there. He's just kind of got that kind of centered nature just to kind of be calm under pressure. Yeah. I think this section's really about when you're faced with something that feels impossible, eat the elephant one bite at a time, start moving. Because there's fight, flight and freeze, and I'm a freezer. So I just freeze when there's something that's going badly or something that shocked me, and feel a little bit helpless. So I think the books help me think about movement in those situations, but disciplined movement. And I think of the word kinetic energy when this kind of stuff happens, and to grit your teeth and get determined and deal with it. Yeah, not always easy though. It takes practice.
So you saying like a deer in headlights when you say you're a freezer? Is that what you mean? Right?
Yeah, just like a statue, but it's something that can be practiced.
I find myself as being the opposite, but the opposite in a weird way is I find that I'll immediately rush off and go and do something silly. I might get caught up in the intensity of the moment. And
is it a flight or a fight or a bit of both?
I think it's a fight in the sense just to get in there, but I think it's a flight in the sense of escaping, the real way to deal with it. I think is the way I look at it.
Interesting.
Certainly, if someone was wanting to have a go at me, I'd be more of a flight person.
Physically,
yeah, because I just have not got the time. I don't think anyone's going to win out of that situation.
Yep. So he says, okay, you've got something very difficult to deal with. Don't focus on that. Instead, break it down into pieces. Simply do what you need to do right now and do it well, and then move on to the next thing. Follow the process and not the prize.
Yeah. I'm really visual, right? And so something I don't do enough is I've got like a daily diary that I carry with me everywhere. I don't use that enough to deal with problems.
Cool.
Because I find I get lost in my own head, particularly when there's some really tough obstacles and problems in the way. But as soon as something is laid out visually for me, things kind of slot into place. And
that's cool. So you could pull it out and draw a diagram or something.
Yeah. I don't take advantage of that enough. And that's something that I've found has worked for me in the past, but something that I don't utilize enough. I utilize it more helping others than I do helping myself.
Well, that is probably a common theme with a lot of people, including myself. Other people's problems are easier than your own.
Clarity of perspective, mate.
Yeah. So that brings us on to one of the other parts of the book that's pretty central.
Yes. This is a big part and I actually think this is the first section of the book is perspective.
Correct.
And as I've kind of highlighted there is whenever you are part of the problem, you're not being objective. So when it's someone else's situation, you aren't taking into consideration everything that they are thinking. They know a lot more about the problem. They know what their emotions feel. They know how they're inclined in particular ways when you're dealing with someone else. But you don't see all that. You just see the situation for what it is. I kind of think of it as, have you done any painting or drawing?
No. Oh, yes, but not recently.
Back in year 6 art class.
I coloured outside of the lines.
At least you probably got your pen license. I didn't get that far. So there's this, now I don't know very much about it, but there's this idea in painting where you, instead of actually seeing the world as we actually see it, is you see it for all the colours and light and what is actually there.
So like the fundamental shapes of things as well.
The fundamental shape, the actual colour of what you're seeing, not your interpretation of the colour. And so instead of your visual field being this thing that kind of wraps around you, it's just this blank canvas directly in front of you. And that's the way that people are able to paint, realistic situations. And I kind of liken that a little bit to this idea of, you need to see your problems as a painter sees a landscape.
That's it. That's really cool.
And see what is actually there as opposed to what your connection is to those things that are there. And that way you make the problem objective. And that's the way that we look at other people's problems is what my take on it was.
That's a really good analogy. A good person dyes events with his own colour and turns whatever happens to his own benefit. Seneca. That was in the book. It's a nice link. So this concept is that, as I understand it, again, this has helped me a lot, that things happen and they're just things that happen. There's no, and then you attach a meaning to them. And you can attach whatever meaning that you want. Some things are going to be, for you, just objectively bad. You can't avoid that. And some things genuinely might be. But many things are somewhere in the middle. And you can pretty much find something good out of most things. Now, very important to know that this is not like the idea that became popular maybe 5-10 years ago of like positive thinking, in its purest form. It's because that's a load of shit. It's
what do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, it's a bastardization of this idea.
So what is the positive thinking?
It's like positive mindset, always never think about things that are bad, if you think good thoughts, they will come true, this sort of idea. And there, again, there's a little bit of truth in it, right? Because but the deeper meaning of that, and probably the more helpful, is that, the cup falls off this table and it breaks. It is something that just happened. You can either think, that really pissed me off, and maybe it did, and you can feel that, acknowledge it, but you can also take the moment to think that what can I learn from this, or what good could come of it? Maybe I'll get a nice new cup. Maybe I'll learn not to put my cup on the edge of the table. And that kind of idea that you bring your own lens to a situation gives you power to control the evolution of how you feel about it.
Yeah. Okay. And so, in the cup situation, right?
It's a pretty bad analogy. I've got a cup here.
So in the cup situation, right?
Did I mention cups last episode? I don't know.
You'll probably look at your cup last time. So
I've got to get some new material.
You need some new objects in front of you. So the cup drops on the ground, right? And I guess the positive, this endless positive approach would be, oh, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, not so great, but maybe the more the perspective to be taken is, what is there an opportunity here? Maybe that was a shit cup that I've been meaning to replace for a long time. It's not all it's not all flowers.
So, and it's another way of putting it is like, I used to wake up in the morning hoping nothing bad had happened that day, and I still do this. I wake up and I go, I hope I have a good day today and nothing bad happens. But this kind of philosophy is, hey, bad things are going to happen to you. Just accept that straight up. And you can decide how bad they are. They're going to hurt. There's no denying that. Wishing things to be positive is not an effective strategy. However, dealing with reality and finding the good in things, you're going to live a better life. It's actually kind of going with the punch of, like an MMA fighter. They can, rather than punching someone bluntly back, they use their own energy against the opponent and take them down. That's the concept here, is like, hey, bad shit's going to happen. Why don't you go with that energy, deal with it, and find something good in it?
Yeah, I really great quote, and I actually think it's from Tony Robbins. Is, life is not happening to you; it's happening for you, and just go with the flow with that. It's quite interesting. You mentioned the MMA fighter, mate, because he tells a story of Hurricane Carter in this section of the book, and he was a middleweight title contender back in the mid 1960s, and basically he ended up being put on trial for a crime to murdering people and a couple of other atrocities, right? And he received basically in that time there was a lot of problems around in terms of the judicial system, and they probably still got big flaws, but I imagine things have got better. But either way, he received a sentence for 3 life sentences, and for a crime that he had nothing to do with. So, and was obviously sent to prison. Now, when he entered the prison, he's been noted as looking the warden in the eyes and proceeding to inform the warden and the guards that he was not giving up the last thing that he controlled himself. And so he took that whole mentality into this triple life sentence that he hadn't committed any crime for. And it took him 19 years of 2 different trials to overturn the original verdict through constant persistence. And you'd be pretty pissed off, I imagine, or seemingly pissed off that it took 19 years and you were in there for 19 years, which is almost a full life sentence in itself. And he walked out and didn't take any retribution. No civil suit followed to recover damages for the 19 years, and just resumed his daily life. So that's a pretty powerful story of just how far you could take something like that. It's never, you never have such a bad problem that,
That's pretty amazing. That would have broken me.
You're not the only one, mate.
And so one of the last ideas you've got here is make the world a better place.
So this ties in. So he obviously talks about action that takes a big form, and he talks about perception, and then he basically rounds what he ends up basically being this triad, being the will. So he says, if perception and action were the disciplines of mind and body, then will is the discipline of heart and soul. And I look at this as being the bigger picture. It's like, why are we solving these problems in the first place? What are these obstacles? What do they mean in the first place? And so one of the bits that he talks about in this is, making the world a better place. And there's a great quote kicking it off by Leroy Percy, which is, a man's job is to make the world a better place to live in, so far as he is able, always remembering the results will be infinitesimal, and to attend to his own soul. So it's all well and good overcoming all these obstacles, right? But, it's about contributing something back, is what I took from this, and providing a little bit more. And he says that, he doesn't want this to be conflated with, that we are this great individual that can solve the world's problems and things. No, he looks at it from the sense that, do what you can and make some sort of contribution. There's no reason not to. There's you're part of this greater whole, as opposed to being just this one person. And I think that was really, really powerful.
It's ethics, really, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. That's very, very true.
Pretty awesome. And so this book isn't that big. You can read it pretty quickly, I reckon. It's a good listen. I've got the hard copy and the Audible, and because it's got a narrative style, it's very easy to listen to. So very accessible.
Yeah, and so the other thing is, because you're going to read it every year, what would you prefer to do?
Ew. I think I'm going to read it this year because I'll be able to underline stuff.
Take a little bit more away. Yeah.
But I'd probably, if I was first doing it, I'd listen to it.
Yeah. I think I tend to agree. It is a relatively short book, I would say. Or it felt short reading it.
Yeah.
Which is
highly recommended.
So what are you going to actually do different? I know we've covered a bit off, but
yeah, I mean, because I've read this a few times, I kind of feel like the action, instead of freezing in the face of adversity and being aware enough to do something and get determined, is something I've taken away. But the biggest thing is trying to see the good in a situation as well as the bad, and figuring out what you can take out of something, what you can learn out of any situation, what kind of there is good and bad in everything,
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. There's obviously taking the action, right? Which is all well and good, and that is one big thing that I'm really trying to delve into, particularly this year. But he talks about Rockefeller in the book a little bit, and he was known for not being rattled, and he copped quite a bit of scrutiny, arguably for good reason, and he kind of initiated his life and his career in his work through this, what he calls his apprenticeship, through the School of Adversity and Stress. And what I took away from that was, just trying to continue to encounter these tougher situations and kind of keep pushing that boundary, because really the only way to go through it is the apprenticeship model, which is to encounter some of these situations. So it's about taking action, but realizing where your boundaries are and trying to jump into those a little bit.
Get just beyond them. That's awesome.
Ulysses S. Grant. That's the Civil War general.
Yes, I have heard of him.
Just Googled it.
So we might tie it off with a nice little closing quote. So, see things for what they are, do what we can, endure and bear what we must. What blocked the path now is the path. What once impeded action advances action. The obstacle is the way.
Awesome. See you, mate.
Thank you, mate.